Tell me when.
Let's start.
Just start? Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Michelle, and my dear husband, Noah, who's right here, for your technical and moral support. And thank you, Smile On Seniors, who have welcomed me yet again for another adventure in Jewish history. I'm very grateful and excited to be part of your roster of speakers. And today we have a particularly engrossing topic to add to our growing understanding and appreciation of American Jewish history. First, a short review of what we've accomplished so far. We have over the years taken a journey together, exploring the highlights of the expanding role of the Jewish experience in America, from the first few Sephardic Jewish arrivals in the settlement of New Amsterdam, to the Jews of the colonial period, to the Jewish influence in the Revolutionary War, to the Jews of the Civil War, particularly the newly arrived Ashkenazi Jews, to the 19th and early 20th century immigration of millions of Jews from Eastern Europe, and the growth of their settlement, especially on the Lower East Side, the Jewish role in the development of trade unions and social services, which made life more tolerable in the sweatshops and tenements of New York City. Wow, we really learned a lot together over the years. We now turn chronologically to the next major event in world history, in which Jews the world over played an enormous part, but suffered so much. A cataclysmic event whose issues have yet to be resolved, as you can see in today's daily headlines. This is the focal point of today's talk, a look at the Jewish experience in the time of World War I, 1914 to 1918, in America, Europe, and the Middle East, and a topic especially relevant for today, December 7th, a day which will live in infamy, as President Roosevelt said, because the seeds for World War II were definitely sown in World War I. It's a very serious topic, but let me start with something a little lighthearted for you who remember the Broadway show Funny Girl. Let's listen to Barbra Streisand singing a comical song written for that show about America entering World War I, a song called Private Schwartz from Rockaway. Tell me if you could hear it. If not, I could play it. I'll play it for you, if that's okay. I hope it doesn't interfere. And I guess you would report that the Kaiser runs the black away, that they tell him he can walk. But then I get mad, believe it, Jack. Up on there comes a maniac. I kick in the foot, I shut in the pants, I wouldn't give a second chance. Schwartz been the black away. Okay, I hope that came through. I really do. The theme of that song is America's entering the war 3 years after it started, and which finally brought victories to the Allies. The other theme of the song is that Jews fought. Well over 1 million Jewish soldiers were in the combined armies of the war, fighting and dying in almost every country in Europe on opposing sides of the war. The most important points that I'll be making are these. One, it was a miserable, barbaric, hellish war in which millions of East German Jews and Jews living in the Ottoman Empire suffered upheavals the likes of which weren't seen again until World War II, just 20 years later.
Two, the social and political forces of World War I changed the map of Europe and even the Middle East in profound ways. It destroyed vast regimes, the Kaiser of Germany, the Tsar of Russia, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. It created new boundaries. I wonder, Michelle, if you could click on that to show how the boundaries changed during in the aftermath of World War I. It's an animated map, and you could see the boundaries changing, except I don't think so. Okay, I'll go on. The World War I led to the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, which dealt another devastating blow to traditional Jewish life. And three, people and events with which we are familiar, like David Ben-Gurion, Chaim Weizmann, and the Balfour Declaration, all stemmed from the turbulent forces of World War I. The war years introduced to the world the revolutionary idea of Zionism, and thus began the process toward creation of a homeland for Jews carved out of what was then called Palestine, part of the Ottoman Empire. It's said that World War I began on Tisha B'Av in August 1914, but the spark of the war actually occurred a month before that, with the assassination of the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and his wife. From that assassination, events quickly escalated like an out-of-control fire. On that day of Tisha B'Av, Russia, Germany, and France declared war on each other, and the other countries which were bound by defensive treaties quickly joined the fight like rows of falling dominoes. And in this map, you could see that what's in blue, Russia, France, and the United Kingdom, Great Britain, were all allies. Austria, Hungary, Germany, Italy, although Italy changed sides later in the war, and the Ottoman Empire, which you don't see, they were part of the Central Powers. Spain was neutral, Switzerland was neutral, Sweden and Norway, the Scandinavian countries, were neutral. Thus, Tisha B'Av, on August 1st, marked the declaration of a vicious and barbaric war in which Jews became tragic victims because so much of the fighting took place in regions where the Jews were living. On the Allied side, the major countries were Great Britain, France, Russia, and the United States. And on the Central Powers side, the main countries were the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. One of the only few countries that escaped these entangling alliances was the United States, which remained neutral until 1917. America's participation in the war lasted a year and a half, after which time Germany capitulated, and the war was finally over after 4 bloody, exhausting years. The war was generally fought on 2 fronts: the Western Front in Western Europe, particularly Belgium and France, which were invaded by Germany, and the Eastern Front, in which invading German armies fought against Russian soldiers. Here you can see that gas masks were used, and even the horse has a gas mask. In all, over 10 million soldiers and 10 million civilians on both sides were killed, and 21 million were wounded. The flu epidemic following the war claimed millions of more lives. Here you see a picture of trenches that were typically done on the Western Front. The trenches were sometimes lived in for months at a time. They were just horrible places of lice and epidemics. And you could see another picture over there of soldiers fighting, wearing gas masks and using the machine gun, which was newly developed for World War I. At the outbreak of the war, close to 3/4 of the world's Jews lived in Europe and the Middle East. 4 million Jews lived in the battlegrounds of Austria, Hungary, Germany, and Russia. As fighting began, over 1 million East European Jews soon became refugees. In Russia, as many as 350,000 terrorized Jews were expelled away from their homes towards Siberia with virtually no notice. Jews were accused of collaborating and spying for Russia's enemy, Germany, and Germany accused Jews of spying for its enemy, Russia. Here you see a picture of German Jews who see their German soldiers walking by. And in the next picture, you see shtetl Jews being confronted by soldiers looking like a German soldier. There was no protection from murderous, lawless Russian peasants or murderous, lawless invading armies, and Jews endured rapes and pogroms from both. Life for Jewish refugees was reduced to conditions of terrible poverty, disease, fear, decimated cities and towns, and ruined traditional Jewish life. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was a 14-year-old boy when floods of refugees streamed into the Russian city his family lived in, Yekaterinoslav, I think is how you pronounce it, Yekaterinoslav. His parents opened their home to the refugees and helped as much as possible to provide for them, ransom the captives at risk to their own lives. Socially, economically, culturally, religiously, Jewish life was almost completely destroyed by the war and would never be the same again. During the course of the war, opposing armies advanced and retreated several times over the Pale of Settlement, the land on the western border of the Russian Empire, where Jews had been forced to live for more than 100 years. Towns and villages were captured and recaptured several times. 250,000 Jews were killed either on the battlefield or as civilian refugees in World War I. The U.S. Army contained 200,000 to 250,000 Jewish soldiers, and here you see a picture of Jewish men signing up for the war, including 10,000 Jewish officers, 3 generals, and a rear admiral. In terms of percentage, there was a greater percentage of American Jewish soldiers than non-Jewish. Half of the 77th Division were Jews from New York City. Practically every American Jew had a family member, friend, or neighbor who served or sacrificed in some way. Some Jewish servicemen had only a limited grasp of English. Others had religious and kashrut requirements, which the Army tried to address. Major Jewish holidays were observed at training camps, and Jewish chaplains served on the front. There were 50,000 Jews in the British Army, with 3 Jewish units, the 38th, 39th, and 40th battalions, and many Jewish officers and generals. There were 500,000 Jews in the Russian army. There were 300,000 Jews in the Austro-Hungarian army, with 2,500 Jewish officers, 3 field marshals, and 5 major generals. And here you see Jewish soldiers celebrating Hanukkah in what looks like the Kaiser's army. Hundreds of Jewish soldiers were awarded the highest medals for heroic actions in battle on both sides. But Jewish soldiers in the German army require special attention. 100,000 Jews were in the German army, with 70,000 fighting on the front lines. Over 12,000 Jewish soldiers were killed. 18,000 Jews were awarded the Iron Cross. For many German Jews, the war held the hope of being treated equal to non-Jewish Germans for the first time. Many German Jews had strong patriotic feelings for Germany, and the belief that a German victory would liberate the Russian Jews from the pogroms and persecutions of the Tsar. Otto Frank, Anne Frank's father, was a lieutenant in the German army. Jewish pilots, doctors, professors like Dr. Richard Willstatter, who developed the gas mask, which saved countless lives, all were decorated with the highest honors. None of these patriotic soldiers were protected from German anti-Semitism. Charges were made that German Jews were evading joining the army. A quote, census was taken to prove this charge, but the opposite was actually found to be true. Jews were volunteering in the German army in record numbers, but this result was ignored and never published. Anti-Jewish propaganda and accusations continued, especially toward the end of the war when Germany lost. Then Jews were the scapegoats, said to have, quote, stabbed Germany in the back, unquote, that Jews were responsible for Germany's defeat. Many of the same German Jewish soldiers who had been awarded medals for bravery at risk of their lives were later interred in Nazi concentration camps 20 years later. Hitler was then a minor officer in the German army and used this propaganda to rise to power 20 years later. The war also was fought in the countries of the Ottoman Empire, mainly in Turkey, and Jews played a substantial role here too. Jewish battalions under the British Army were formed, calling themselves the Zion Muleteers. The Zion Mule Corps became the first regular Jewish fighting force since Roman times, with a Jewish emblem and flag. These men were 500 volunteers, mostly Jews from the Ottoman Empire, and were trained and led by Zev Jabotinsky and Joseph Trumbuldorf. They fought for Great Britain, but also with the hope and expectation that they would liberate Jewish Palestine from oppressive Ottoman rule. And here you see a picture of some of the men from the Zion Mule Corps at the Kotel after the British liberated Palestine. Their training was in Hebrew and Yiddish. Their badge, the Star of David. Their flag, the blue and white Zionist flag that flew alongside the British Union Jack. As they left for battle, they sang Hatikvah and took a Torah scroll with them. The Zion Mule Corps soldiers included 2 future prime ministers and 1 future president of Israel. You see here a picture of David Ben-Gurion and Yitzhak Ben-Zvi. Also, Levi Eshkol was in the Zion Mule Corps, and many other men who became leaders of the future state of Israel. They are, you see David Ben-Gurion and Yitzhak Ben-Zvi wearing Turkish fezes, their Turkish hats, because they lived in Turkey for quite some time, actually going to Turkish universities to become lawyers, which they did. Their service to Great Britain and the influential voice of Chaim Weizmann, who had, oh, here's another picture of the Zion Mule Corps with their Israeli flag, or soon to be Israeli flag. Their service to Great Britain and the influential voice of Chaim Weizmann, who had the ear of Winston Churchill and David Lloyd George, Prime Minister of England, and supporters of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, contributed to the issuance of the Balfour Declaration. The British government believed that by showing support to Jews, they could influence American Jewish interests to enter the war. This did happen, along with other factors which combined to bring America from a state of neutrality to joining the side of the Allied powers. Politically, a pro-Jewish Palestine sentiment was in the air, which was part of Great Britain's strategy to destroy the Ottoman Empire and take over its colonies. Herbert Samuels, a Jewish British cabinet minister, had recently published a book in England called The Future of Palestine, arguing that Palestine should be a Jewish colony of Great Britain. Georges Clemenceau, Prime Minister of France, also supported the idea of Palestine becoming a Jewish homeland. And let's now turn to the Jewish American experience in World War I. At the outbreak of the war, although the United States was officially neutral, most American Jews supported the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary. But the general American opinion supported the Allies. American Jews were outraged at the Russian Tsar's murderous, vicious, anti-Semitic policies and pogroms, which killed tens of thousands of Jews and which decimated Jewish towns and villages. Remember that Russia was a member of the Allied forces. On the other hand, at the time of the outbreak of the war, the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Germany were seen by American Jews as a relatively good place for Jews to live, producing an Einstein, a Freud, and high-ranking Jews in the cabinet and army. In addition, there was a residue of anti-French feeling among American Jews due to the Dreyfus affair of a few years prior, in which an innocent Jew was found guilty of treason and publicly humiliated and imprisoned. But pro-Central Powers sympathy changed for American Jews as a result of how the German army of occupation proved no better than the Russians in its treatment of Jews. The American Jewish newspapers began to print stories of German atrocities against Jews, especially in Poland, as well as stories of German anti-Semitism. In addition, German submarine U-boats began sinking commercial and passenger ships in international waters, like the Lusitania, a British ship which carried many hundreds of American passengers. When the German army invaded Russia, their soldiers did not act like the liberators that the Jews had hoped for. So American Jewish sympathies began to align themselves with the generally pro-Allied sympathies of the general American public. And by 1917, most Jewish and non-Jewish Americans believed that the United States must abandon its neutrality and go to war on the Allied side. This America did, and its entry into the war turned the tide for an Allied victory a year and a half later. But meanwhile, Jews in Europe and the former Ottoman Empire were facing a major crisis of starvation. How did American Jews respond to this emergency? At the very outbreak of the war, in August 1914, Henry Morgenthau, U.S. ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, cabled New York philanthropist Jacob Schiff. There it is. There it is. The actual cablegram to Jacob Schiff asking for $50,000 to help support the suffering Jews of Palestine. That cable was the beginning of the establishment of the Joint Distribution Committee, which became a major Jewish organization which donated essential life-giving food, medical, and humanitarian aid to Jewish refugees in Europe and Palestine. Between 1914 and 1918, when the war ended, the Joint had raised $22 million, which is the equivalent in today's money of $573 million. The Joint continued its relief aid long after the war ended, especially in Poland, Ukraine, and Russia. World War I gave millions of immigrant Jews a sense of participation in American life, pride in being new Americans, as it did to other immigrant groups like the Italians and Irish. It gave Jews a sense not only of their Jewishness, but also of their Americanness. Jews were hopeful that with their participation, anti-Semitism would die. It didn't, but only changed form. And the presence of prominent Jews like Leon Trotsky, Rosa Luxemburg, and Emma Goldman in socialist and communist organizations also contributed to an anti-Semitic backlash. After the war, fear of immigrants, whipped up by people like Henry Ford and the Ku Klux Klan, contributed to the United States government's closing the doors to immigration, Jewish immigration, ending the great wave of the 2 million Jews, mostly from Eastern Europe, who had come to America from the 1880s to 1924, when immigration essentially ended. But the general feeling from most American Jews was, we are all Americans, we're all in this together. I'd like to end on a positive note. Let's listen to a recording made over 100 years ago in 1917 as the well-known Jewish singer of her day, Nora Bayes, recorded the patriotic George M. Cohan's World War I song, Over There. It was composed to encourage recruitment. Instead of singing, "The Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming," she substitutes the Jewish name, "The Sammys are coming, the Sammys are coming." And the Sammys of America, American Jews who were new immigrants and who barely spoke English, did rise to the occasion in the hope of making the world safe for democracy. As Woodrow Wilson said, it was her greatest hit. Let's listen, and I'm going to play it from my side, because I'm not sure that you hear it. Can you hear it?
Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Take it on the run, on the run, on the run. Hear them calling you and me. Everyone's gonna live a dream. Hurry right away, no delay, not today. Make your daddy glad to have had such a lad. Tell your sweetheart not to fight, to be proud of the way they fly. Over there, over there. That's the word over there. That the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are
Second
coming.
verse.
The drums are coming everywhere. Don't prepare, say a prayer. Send the word to beware. We're over, we're running over, and we won't come back till it's over there.
Okay. That's it. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching, and looking forward to our next gathering together to learn more about American Jewish history. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther. I wish we could have seen you in person. Esther Malka, she's in person.
Malka what?
She's so Lantor.
What's the last name?
Lantor. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Oh, you can hear us. Okay. Yeah. So it's not the same as you being in person. I'll admit, like my boring PowerPoint, but they still got the gist of it. I think. This is mine. Yeah. Okay, I'm
She's a
gonna
very
shut
good
up.
narrator.
She is. She prepares so much. Oh, I've got to stop just a minute.
Okay, so should I sign off, Michelle?
Yeah, I think you should sign.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.